Good evening. I hope that you've all enjoyed a very good and restful festive period with your loved ones. It is now just over 3 years since Gibraltar decided that it was time for change. This year, you'll be given the opportunity to decide whether the government has brought about the kind of change you expected, and equally as importantly, the kind of change that provides the basis for a viable and sustainable economic and political project for this community. The kind of project that the GSD, with your help, undertook during 16 years of government. A project that included the transformation of Gibraltar's reputation, its physical appearance, and many of our institutions. The conduct of our external relations, intelligently but safely. The creation of thousands of new jobs, huge increases in the standard of living, very healthy public finances, despite the big lie at the last election. Who could possibly believe that a 100 million black hole existed in December 2011, or that our public finances were in a ruinous state when within months of the general election Mr. Picardo started spending money as if it were going out of fashion, whilst at the same time freezing rents, rates, electricity, cutting income tax and donating every penny of government surpluses to community care. That not only raises the question as to why you should trust Mr. Picardo on anything he might say about the public finances, but it also explains why the government is gambling with the public finances by keeping significant public borrowing off the books of the government by using the Gibraltar Savings Bank and Credit Finance Company to create the illusion of less debt, even though the government guarantees all debt incurred by the Gibraltar Savings Bank. And this has all given rise to an economic and political project by the government that is neither viable, nor sustainable, nor, in my opinion, prudent. Annual recurrent expenditure has risen since March 2012 by 95.6 million, an increase of 28%. Inevitably, even direct debt is increasing. Net public debt is at the highest it's been in the history of this community, at 372 million, an increase of 94 million from March 2013. Gross public debt has increased over that period by 76 million to 452 million. Over recent months, Mr. Picardo has undergone a Damascene conversion to GSD policy by arguing that although net debt is the highest in history, it is only 26% of GDP and therefore prudent. But of course, when net debt stood at 25% of GDP in 2011, Mr. Picardo claimed that the GSD was addicted to debt. If the GSD was addicted to debt then, he must surely be addicted to debt today. But as we have constantly emphasized, these figures do not provide a complete picture of public debt. Over the last 3 years, the government has been transferring government debentures, which rank as government debt, into the Gibraltar Savings Bank where it does not, even though the government guarantees that money. Nearly half of all the money in the Gibraltar Savings Bank, some 400 million, has been invested in Credit Finance Company, and the government has invested a further 30 million. 82 million of that total has been spent in providing loans to the Sunborn housing estates, individuals or entities, to allow them to pay government arrears, including taxes, and in paying the commuted pensions of civil servants. None of this appears in the accounts of the government, and none of it is approved by Parliament. To say that credit finance does not pay government projects is wholly misleading when the expenditure it is incurring is properly that of the government. If the government chooses to provide loans to third parties, it should do so directly and not use savers' money as its unaccountable credit card. Disclosing what the Chief Minister described in his New Year's message as a balance sheet for credit finance is another attempt to pull the wool over your eyes. Only Mr. Picardo could describe it as a balance sheet. It contains the most minimum information and does not show who is benefiting from substantial loans, in what amounts and on what terms. That is the information any open and transparent government would provide to allow us to assess any risk in these loans. Moreover, the remainder of the money in credit finance, some 347 million, has been invested in Gibraltar Investment Holdings Limited, a company used by the government to fund all other government companies and projects undertaken by them. Why would the government procure the investment of 347 million from Credit Finance to Gibraltar Investment Holdings Limited when it has no intention of using that money to fund other government companies or their projects? We will have to wait and see. But when Mr. Picardo asks you to trust him, Look at his track record, the big lie at the last election, the way he created credit finance secretly without telling anyone, including Parliament, and then the way he secretly started pouring millions of savers of money into it and making loans to third parties, the way he lied to Parliament when he said the government had not directly or indirectly provided loans to the Sun Board, only coming clean the day after the by-election. Ministers in other countries have been forced to resign for far less. These levels of direct and indirect debt have the potential to be a real millstone around the necks of our children and our children's children. This is not the time to be taking blind gambles. David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, has said there are red lights flashing on the global economy. We're also going through some very difficult times in our relations with Spain. We do not know where the EU debate is going to end up in the UK, and there has been very little inward investment. Our dependence on tobacco revenue is increasing. Import duty, the bulk of which is tobacco revenue, today accounts for 33% of all government revenue. Finally, all this spending is cranking up a culture of expectation and entitlement that is wholly irresponsible and not sustainable in the long run. But what would the GSD do? Well, we would bring all expenditure incurred by credit finance into the books of the government, and we would publish who has benefited from loans and in what amounts. We need to change how we see the role of government. That means tackling the culture of entitlement that is a rot at our core. For example, we cannot continue with a policy where anyone, regardless of wealth, can expect to be entitled to government subsidized accommodation at the expense of others who are less fortunate or the resources of the community generally. That is why we announced our means testing policy for future applicants on the housing waiting list. This forward-thinking policy is one which we believe will be supported by the majority of fair-minded and hard-working Gibraltarians. We must also encourage those who want to better themselves and not create obstacles to self-improvement. It is fundamentally wrong for the ETB to refuse people access to job vacancies simply because they already have a job. It is also wrong to condemn an entire generation of our youngsters to no or no adequate training, as the government is doing with the future job strategy, an issue we will remedy with properly focused training schemes in the skills needed by the private sector. In addition, responsible government requires us not to behave as if the good times will last forever, and we need to be prepared for the inevitable pressure on tobacco revenue. Our own capital projects must be focused on those that are socially and economically necessary and important. A new power station, the tunnel under the runway, which we hope will be substantially paid out of damages from OHL, and the relocation of Bayside, Westside and the Technical College to the Rook area, which will then release land in all those areas for other uses. Building new schools is necessary. Spending money on a plush extension to number 6 Convent Place is certainly not. Moving Bayside would also allow us for the redevelopment of Victoria Stadium into a UEFA Cat 3 or 4 stadium so that the GFA home games are played in Gibraltar. That will also increase training facilities for use at all levels, which we believe is the real problem affecting grassroots football. We are not against the GFA having its own stadium, and we are prepared to sit down with them and consider alternatives. But to be crystal clear, if we are elected, we will not allow a stadium to be built at Europa Point, and we will not fund a new stadium. Over the last year, we took the unprecedented step of publishing many of our policies well in advance of the next election. We intend to continue doing that, and I am confident that over the next few months, you will be able to judge for yourselves that the GSD is the party to be trusted with the responsible, prudent and safe stewardship of our affairs and our economy, without which the Gibraltar economic and political project would falter. My party looks forward to the challenges and opportunities 2015 will bring with great enthusiasm. On behalf of myself and my family, I wish you all a happy, healthy and prosperous 2015. Good evening and thank you for listening.